So, good morning, ladies, and thank you so much for joining us today. It's lovely to see your faces. Today, we wanted to dive in at the informed perspective into looking a bit more at community, which has been the theme of our month. Also looking at online communities and how these are showing up in our lives. As many of you know, at the informed perspective, everything that we're doing is coming back to community. And humans ultimately are wired to belong, right? Our mental health and our overall well-being flourishes when we're part of some kind of supportive tribe. But we know that in today's digital world, many of us have drifted away from that essential sense of connection. And we're passionate about rebuilding community bonds, local community bonds as well, and encouraging people to step out of their comfort zone and get involved. And contribution doesn't really have to be that big, right? It can even be just giving a little bit of your time. Even if you gave just an hour a year, it could spark real change if we all took part. I get it that life's busy and work can be draining, and personal commitments can stretch us all pretty thin. But we've seen firsthand really how powerful these in-person connections can be. However, we do know that not everyone can show up physically. This can be due to illness, this can be due to anxiety or disability. And sometimes that real world engagement isn't possible or is more difficult. And that's where online communities, of course, also have a role to play. Online communities can offer a real alternative. They can allow people now, like us, from across the world to connect and share and find a sense of belonging. And that's especially of value maybe for people who are isolated and also for people who have niche interests. These digital tribes that we find online, they can introduce us to new perspectives and spark meaningful relationships, and can also lead to the local connections, which we might not have made otherwise. We may find someone actually within our own city who we might not have found otherwise, the irony of that. So there's a unique magic in bringing together people. And online, it's often a case that you can bring people together who already care about the same thing. Sometimes the point being that you don't have to convince these people because they're already in. And online communities have given everyday people the power to create change, build leadership, and shape opportunities for themselves and for others. So whether it's 1 hour in your neighborhood or one conversation online, every bit of connection counts. So I just want to start off our session today with a few quotes, which was like setting the scene before we plunge into some questions with our guests today. And the first one is a quote from Alone Together by Sherry Turkle. In online worlds, you have virtuosity and fantasy, and something more. Your performances put you at the center of a new community with virtual best friends and a sense of belonging. It's not unusual for people to feel more comfortable in an unreal place than a real one, because they feel they show their better and perhaps truer self. And from Charles Leadbeater, a British author and former government advisor, he made this statement in an article titled "The Internet Can Facilitate Social Change" that was published in The Guardian. You can go online now and find really thoughtful, in-depth, considered, well-informed communities around virtually any issue. If it's your issue, there are now new ways of mobilizing knowledge that weren't there before. There are real bodies of significant knowledge on the web that are valuable, that we haven't done nearly enough with. And then from Parisia E., The Filter Bubble, What the Internet's Hiding from You. The filter bubble is the invisible algorithmic force that shapes your online experience. It shows you only what it thinks you want you to see based on your previous behavior. This can create echo chambers where people are exposed only to ideas and perspectives that reinforce their own limiting understanding of the world. And just to close, from Darren Rose, the best advice I can give on building community online is be the community you want to have. So now, just leaving those to sit, I will pass you over to my colleague Jenny, and she will introduce you to our wonderful guests joining us today.
Thank you, Penny. So today we've got Jackie Power, MSc, is an addiction specialist, therapist, and performance poet who combines therapeutic expertise with creative expression. She is a founder of Feeling Freedom, an online program supporting those affected by loved ones' addiction. Her award-nominated poetry collection, Stop the World, I Want to Get Off, Words for When You Want to Leave the Planet But Don't Have Billions to Build a Rocket, was a finalist in the Independent Authors Awards 2022. A performer at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival and host of the Therapeutic Poet podcast, a finalist in the International Women's Podcast Awards, Jackie continues to break the new ground in merging mental health support with the creative arts. Now, I'm going to just add in as well, we had a brief intros before the recording, and hopefully Jackie will share a lot of what she's doing in wider community work, but something that you did say that I wanted to share was that you want to break down stigmas through conversations. So I really hope you'll tell us more about that as we speak. And we've also got Navine with us today. She's a founder, community builder, and global storyteller. Navine is the force behind Coffee With An Expat, a lifestyle community that empowers expat women around the world. With 24 years experience living across 8 countries, she's turned her personal journey into a global platform celebrating diversity, resilience, and belonging. From a simple coffee gathering in Dubai to a thriving international network, Navine is redefining what it means to find connection whilst constantly starting over. And just a little addition to that as well is the Informed Perspective started over coffee as well. So it's something really close to our hearts. But also, Navine, as you mentioned in our earlier intros, is that, it's quite unexpected for some people to hear that the expat life or community or lack of can be lonely, and I think that's something you're really looking to combat, and it's a wonderful thing you're doing. So can't wait to get on with our chat. So I'll hand back over to Penny for the questions, and we'll just go from there.
So I'm going to turn to Jackie first of all. Hi, Jackie.
Hi.
I thought we would dive in and do a little bit into your background so you can give us sort of a sense of where you're coming from. So you've mentioned that you have experienced the challenge of loving someone in the past who struggled with addiction, and you have spoken about a therapist being very important in helping you understand the importance of community. So how did she help you in this, and what impact did this have on your journey?
When you're loving someone with an addiction, it's kind of like you're this silent majority. There's an awful lot of people going through that, but it's very difficult to share your experience because of stigma, because of misunderstanding. And people will kind of often just go, well, why bother maintaining a relationship with them? Or they'll have lots of misunderstanding around it. And so that can make it incredibly isolating. And so when I went to the therapist to talk about what was happening to me, I think the first thing that was really helpful was she just really normalized my experience, because I thought I was the only person going through this, and how terrible it was, and I couldn't possibly talk about it or tell anyone. And I think also my story obviously involves somebody else's story. And I think things have really shifted in the last few years when we're talking around addiction. There's many more stories of people out there talking about how they're navigating their own addiction, but there's still not many people having the conversation about being in relationship with that, because it brings its own challenges. So she suggested that I went to this community that was just for people that were dealing with things like me. And I was the first couple, I was really split. Part of me absolutely did not want to go. This was not a community that I wanted to be a part of. It wasn't something that I had chosen. And yet I was also desperate to share my story and to feel heard and validated in what I was going through. So I went a couple of times and came back and was like, that's not for me. That's not my thing. And she was like, just keep going, just see. And it was kind of a point of desperation. We had just moved sort of geographically as well. I didn't know many people, and I really didn't feel like I had much choice, to be honest. But then through that community, I mean, I absolutely blossomed and grew. And I think that is that, like Navine said about, the connections, the opposite of that isolation and that loneliness. And suddenly I get to be fully me, not this compartmentalized me that I show up in this space like this or in this space like that. I can just, have the freedom to be exactly who I am. And I think that's probably why I call my program Feeling Freedom, because it was about that sense of freedom. And that's what that community gave me. Yeah,
Do
definitely.
you think that encouraged you, following on from that, to try and find more communities where you could be yourself, or to change because you're saying you wanted to show up as your full self? Did you then feel that that was a difficulty in other parts of your life, and how did you go about managing that?
I think it's something that I can still struggle with, in that I have a real aversion to places where I feel like I have to fit in. It's kind of like I've gone like it's a full pendulum swing. And I actually just recently came off social media because I did my thesis in social media addiction. So I've always had this slight bias of, and social media can be a wonderful space. And I know that lots of people have built amazing communities through that. But it just wasn't for me. And I think there's also that kind of that sense of normalizing that it's not necessarily for everybody, and that can be on based on your background and what your experiences are. And I just find that I just found for me that I was not knowing how to show up because of the algorithms and things. It's like, how do I satisfy this beast? And it was like, actually, I just want to be me. So I think that's the bit that I've taken, is I've actually taken that into other communities where I can try and encourage other people to be their full selves. That's really what all of my work is about.
Okay, and how did you go about doing that?
A couple of ways. Definitely through my poetry. A lot of my poetry is about looking behind the labels or looking behind the conditions. I've got one called Homeless Bum, which is actually all about, what's it like, what the person that becomes homeless has their own narrative, their own story, and what's that all about. Another called All at Sea, which is actually about hoarding, but it's looking at why is it difficult, why do people find it difficult to let go of things. So I'm always reframing the story. So I definitely think I do it through my poetry, and then I think through feeling freedom, because I kept on going to these addiction conferences. There were so many discussions about what's addiction and why do people have it, and there really weren't. I remember asking different people as they were speaking, and asking them as they were talking about what they were doing to help people recover from addiction. I was saying, well, what about the families? What impact do you see on the families? And they were all drawing a blank and saying, yeah, we don't do anything with them, or that we give them an afternoon sort of lecture. And actually, they need to feel safe. They need to feel seen and soothed. And we know that when the family members also get support, that's so helpful to the person that's recovering from the addiction. Most people relapse as soon as they come out of treatment, and that's because they're going back into the family environment. So so through the community of doing that, and that's through education. I also bring my poetry into that as well, because I think poetry ends up being this great way of being able to share our experience in the format of a rhythmical poem. It's like, well, I can see myself in that. I can feel soothed by that rhythm and feel seen in how I take that metaphor and make it have meaning for me.
I love that. A bit like storytelling as well, being able to
Yeah.
facilitate that creative freedom as well. So just to sort of recap, you mentioned feeling freedom, and that is the community that you then founded yourself, having gone through
Yeah.
your own experiences. Can you share how that came about? I mean, you're saying that you were realizing that the family members were not being addressed, or people who were in relationships with people who were addicted. How did you take it from there to actually being a fully fledged project then?
Well, that was birthed in community, actually. So I joined a coaching program called The Poetics. They're a group in Nashville, that's where they're based, in Tennessee. And I think I was just attracted by the name. But the challenge was, what is it that you want to bring into the world, and how can you do that? And so we were encouraged to kind of create our own frameworks, and that's when I came up with the Feeling Freedom framework, which is all about how can we help people feel valued, validated, and vibrant. And that's based on Dr. Dan Siegel. He's a psychiatrist, and he says in order for a child to feel secure, they need to feel safe, seen, and soothed. It's the 4 S's. And I was sort of taking that and extending it, because I think that's what we all need. And when we're talking about recovery in any kind, those three categories, if you like, are so important to be addressed. So I did that, and it was within that community, and that was so lovely, because to get feedback from other people of, again, and validating your idea, and that's so needed. And then I started sort of putting it out into the world, and just late last year, it got funding from the Essex Recovery Foundation. So I'm taking people through the in recovery community in Essex, and it's all online. And so we meet, and we have a weekly session, and there's, you know, all of the other stuff that I provide, which is psychoeducation and much more stuff. But yeah,
So
that's how it
these
came
are
about.
a group online sessions then that you facilitate.
Yeah.
And do the people who take part then have connections with each other and make meaningful relationships with one another?
Well, that's a really lovely thing, because to begin with, no one wants, like me, no one wants to come in the group. No one wants to share their story, because is it worse or better than someone else's story? And, you know, and there can be a lot of comparison there. And so that's when, but the very first session that we have is writing your and telling your story. So it's kind of, it's a bit of a baptism of fire, but we do that through the way in which I encourage storytelling. So it's not somebody sort of giving the whole litany of what's happened to them, but we do it in quite a poetic way, so that people can tell their story without telling their story, if you like. It's a way, you know, using metaphor and things like that. And so, and what I've really noticed, but it takes time. You know, I think we live in a society now where we assume that everything, because so much can happen so quickly, we assume that relationship building can happen really quickly, and it doesn't. It takes those little moments of connection and empathy and all of those sort of little incremental moments to help to build up trust. So with the current group that I've got in, we're in week 9, week 10, and now we're starting to see that burgeoning of people messaging and things each other. But it was all beforehand, it's all been like, we'll put it out into the community, but now people are starting to message between themselves. And I think it's allowing for that natural progression to happen, rather than, because that can be frightening as well, can't it? It's like everyone else is getting on with each other and I'm not. And actually just normalizing all of that, making friends is hard, especially as you get older and you don't have those natural kind of in points. It's a challenge, and we can feel awkward in that. And I think it's normalizing the awkwardness of trying to connect with people, you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's amazing, you know, to hear it all. And there's 3 things that come to mind. I've done that classic where I'm going to name 3 things and probably not get to number 3.
I do that.
So what it's come up time and time again, and this is why we wanted to focus on community this month, because every kind of discussion we had always came back to community and connections, and you both have like absolutely mentioned them just naturally. But the common foundation as well that keeps coming up for us at the moment is this shared experience, like your personal experience. You sometimes can become so isolated with it, and until you put it out there or you accept it or you won't ever know that it's often a shared experience as well. And that can come with, you know, personal feelings, emotions, behaviors, but also, you know, wider experiences. And I just love that, you know, that to just open people's minds that, you know, so and so is looking at this, these things exist, you know, that you can use, even just for storytelling, you can use, you know, sort of poetic approaches to be able to share stories. And the other thing as well was, it's, you know, we mentioned about children, and we're always, you know, you're educated as a child, okay, you can continue like formal education as you get older, but we're still continually learning, and that's learning how we show up in different situations and experiences and how other people do, and learning from those. And people, I think there's not hesitation, but you need to have a certain something about you to be like, actually, I got that gap that I need to fill, and I still need to learn. And this is what we love with the work we do, is we're not saying, oh, we're the experts on it. We want to just invite different people on to share their perspectives and experiences. And if that helps someone with, you know, to gain some new knowledge or to have something to consider, then you know, we feel like we're doing what we've set out to do. But it'd be great, Navine. Go on, sorry,
I was just going to say one thing on that, and I think there's a real split between pride and humility. And as I think often in Western society, we're encouraged to have pride and to kind of, you know, you see this as politicians all the time, don't you? It's like, what do you mean you change your mind? You're not allowed to change your mind. You're not allowed to not know, all of that sort of thing. And actually, humility is where the growth happens and where that connection happens, and that's being open to learning. But we don't we're not encouraged to do that as a community, as a wider community. And I think exactly that sort of, you know, some of the most powerful words can be, I don't know, and you know,
Or help,
and being open to
I need
that, or
help.
help. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Sorry, I interrupted.
No,
No.
that's absolutely right. And I think like with the online conversation as well, like with, you know, people often have a one-sided view one way or the other. It's good for my children, it's not good for my children, it should be banned or it shouldn't, whatever. But at the end of the day, that landscape is also changing so quickly and is so diverse and so complicated that we need to be listening. We need to be listening to everyone's point of view. And it's no good me saying this is black and white and this is the answer, because it's not necessarily. And I might listen to someone else and then be like, actually, you have got a point. And, you know, we're going back to the online communities. For some people, it is a lifeline, right? And I do think there's that value that you're saying you have these online programs, that you're able to reach these people in a way that potentially would be more difficult in your local community as the first stopping gap, and bringing people together and finding that common ground. And that's a lot about sort of the conversations that we're having, is sort of finding connections, talking to people from around the world, and then somehow using that knowledge and that to bring it back local and then help the people around. So that's sort of yeah, and I think that's the same with what you're doing. So I think that's amazing. Do you also do community work locally in addiction, or is it mostly online?
Yeah, in fact, I'm doing a talk next week. I'm working with somebody who he's been in 20 years recovery, and we're doing a talk together. So he's going to share his lived experience, and then I'm going to be popping in all of the psychological, you know, kind of frameworks around it. But I do, yeah, I've done various different things. We've got an amazing, Dorking's an amazing place for community, actually. It's really
Have to move
lovely.
there, Jenny.
Yeah, it's
It's
really,
actually,
honestly, it's
yeah.
brilliant. But they've got something called Patchworking Garden that I used to volunteer at, which is basically a GP set it up who used to suffer or does suffer from depression. And it's just this space that people can come along to, and you can either be a support or supported volunteer. So if you're a support volunteer, then you're going, you know, to help others. And if you're supported, you need the support. But it's a very sort of flat level kind of hierarchy, if you like, where we all come together and garden and do different arts and crafts. And it's just this amazing space. You know, there's people with dementia come, people with schizophrenia, people, you know, who are lonely. And it's just this amazing, accepting space. But yeah, I've also, a couple of years ago, we did a day here called Mindfest, which has gone over, you know, it's been going on for quite a few years, but for 1 year I was the co-director of it, and we brought in 15 different speakers, you know, on a whole host of different things, from sexual abuse to decluttering your wardrobe, you know, but all of these different things that can affect your mental and emotional well-being. I think it's so important. When I decided to come off social media a few weeks ago, I had a day where and this was the thing that made me realize, actually, was I ended up, you know, booking a doctor's appointment that was all via online, not speaking to anyone, doing my self-service checkout, and then arranging to have a parents' evening, again, online, where I wasn't connecting with anyone. And we need that for co-regulation. We need that connection. We need that community. So yeah, it just made me realize, wow, this is sort of easily disappearing before my eyes if I don't take active work in trying to, you know, increase that sort of hive network, if you like,
Yeah, but you
myself.
also need other people as well to be part of that community, and that's huge. And I think we were saying, talking to Navine about how the expat community can be quite tricky and can be quite challenging. And we found that actually in Poland, where we're based at the moment, that it is really difficult to activate that community, and you do have to make your own community. So on that note, we can move over to Navine. Hi, Navine. And wanted to really ask you, how does your online community complement your in-person meetups then?
First, thank you for having me on. Lovely to meet you all. So actually, our community is mainly based in person, and the online is what complements it or supports it, I would say. So we have an online private platform for our community, and on there we just really you know, publish the meetups where they can RSVP. We share resources that we may have had at a workshop. It's also a great space for our members to connect online. And I think the benefit of having an online community, especially for new members, is that they feel that they've already connected with women before they show up. because that can be a scary place for a lot of people if they don't know anybody. So that allows them to be able to see what kind of members are out there, who's going to show up at that event, what are their interests, because everybody has a profile online, so they can see, oh, maybe they're from the same country. My English is not so good, so then I can come to that and know that there's somebody there that can understand me. So I think the online community is very important, just as important as the offline community, but there definitely needs to be a balance. I'm talking about, the connection and not being able to speak to anybody when you're booking an appointment with the doctors or, teachers and so forth. You'll also, I think, notice that it's our children that are creating the new movements now. They are the ones now saying, we don't want to be online anymore. We want to meet in person. And what do they call it? IRL, in real life, these kind of things. So we're seeing a definite shift in how people are using social media, how people are feeling about the online world. I think especially after COVID, and everything that happened with that, the online world just boomed, right? Communities online everywhere, meetings, everything was online. And I think what people need to realize, it's great to have online. I mean, like we're having here, we're all connected from around the world, but there's nothing like the human connection in person. It's something just so magical about that, right? That energy that you feel when you're in the same space as somebody. So we don't use the online as our main platform because I much prefer the human connection in person. But I also encourage that especially for expats, as we move around or our lifestyles are a little bit unpredictable, we're here today, tomorrow we might get notified you have to go to another country, is to definitely have that online community so you can stay connected wherever you go and know that you have a community that you can tap into when you're having that down moment or you have a question you want to ask. So it's definitely important to have that.
And I think that's a really unique thing about what you've created, Navine, is because it's the importance and almost the necessity of the in-person meetups and that socializing element where you need to create these relationships. You've gone to a completely new country, you're starting your life from scratch essentially, in the physical form, but that online element, you have created this community where people are now part of, and they've got somewhere as a resource to go to look up if they move to another country. And this and I think that's the perfect complement. It would be really interesting to hear more about what you do at your in-person events as well, and you said about getting speakers as well, like what so Coffee with an Expat, like it makes me think coffee mornings, but I know there's much more to that, so can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the biggest misconception about expat women is that we just meet and have coffee. I mean, I think from the outside, people do look at our lifestyle and just think, wow, you guys have it all, and you guys go out and have coffees and you dress nicely, you buy fancy bags. And I think there's, that narrative is slowly changing because there are a lot more expats in the world now than there were back when I started. But within my community, we're a lifestyle community. And so, what is the one thing people always ask when they move to a new country? So like, how do I make friends? And the typical answer would be join something that you're interested in, go to the gym, go to yoga, join a business club, those kind of things. So I took those ideas and created it within the community. So we have sub-community groups within the community. So you will find business and development, health and wellness, arts and culture, people of determination mums group, which is mums that have children of disability. We call it people of determination here in the UAE. I'm not sure if it's the same terminology used elsewhere. So we have a lot of these different groups that members can join. It's all inclusive, so they can join whichever groups they like, or as many or as little. And then each group is led by one or two community members. So it really is a community run by the community. And that's the whole purpose, right? It's that we are all part of this community that is something bigger than ourselves, and we all want to give back in some way. And we have so much to learn, which is what I love what you were saying before, is that, we are constantly learning, no matter how old we are, and you just need to be open to embrace that. So within each group, they host their own meetups and gatherings. So we have probably around 2 to 4 meetups a week. And then we have the larger community events, and that could involve anything from doing workshops to our cooking event that we had yesterday. You know, we had an autism awareness event last week, which was beautiful. So we really encompass everything that, you know, expat women, you know, face within their personal and professional lives.
And it's so relatable because I tried that coffee and luncheon for the first year. I needed to take a year out when I got here. I needed to be selfish and not do anything. I left my corporate career in the UK and moved here for my husband's work opportunity, and I just didn't do anything for a year. But it just wasn't sustainable. Like I just I'm financially, I'm kind of joking, but you know, it's like, what am I spending my money on? Like literally coffees and lunches. I just didn't have any meaning to it. And some people will get it, and I don't, but that's when Penny and I, you know, what it was about 9 months later, we, you know, started talking, and we're like, we want to do something with our time. And you know, we're looking for these stuff, but it's just not sort of readily available. And it's interesting when you say around the lifestyle, and I actually thought you were going to go down a different route when you started your answer, but you know, when people are like, oh, join the gym or do something sports, but sometimes these days that's not always social as well. Like people go for their purpose, you know, they business as well. If they've, you know, if I do anything sort of corporate, I might go with my kind of corporate hat on, and you know, you don't necessarily interact. So it's great that from a social wider lifestyle thing you can get these interests, and because people still do want to be social, but it's just not everyone, or it's not facilitated. You know, you just go into you're not going to, you know, you just go into the gym class and you go home or whatever. So it's I thought you were going to say that, but it's actually nice. It's the, you know, it's not the yoga class, it's the people who are interested in that, you know, who could probably recommend where to go, or you know, the latest place that's open. So it's a really nice dimension to it.
What have the biggest challenges been for you with starting your community that you faced along the way?
Oh my gosh. I mean, like I think every creating anything has challenges, right? And I think a lot of the challenges were more self-inflicted rather than it being a challenge, right? Because you're learning, right? So I'm coming from a space of expat experience. I have a wealth of experience. I've moved to 8 countries. I've had 4 kids along the way. You know, I know what it means to start my life over and care for my family first and support my husband in his new role and then look after myself last. So I've been through that roller coaster many times. And throughout the years, obviously, with the way we've moved around and the amount of kids that I've had along the way meant that I couldn't really pursue a career, if you like a full-time career. And also I chose not to, like in all fairness, once I had my first child, my choice was that I wanted to be there for my kids. But having said that, as they started growing, I wanted to do more with my time. I felt like I can give more. So I dabbled in various things in the countries that allowed me to, because I think what another thing to note is that not every country will allow the spouse to work based on the visa that they have. So you do a lot of volunteer work. You know, I tried fashion design. I got my realtor's license when we were living in America. So I dabbled in a lot of things. So coming to start my community in a country that, you know, offers a lot of opportunity, but there's obviously a lot of, you know, hurdles that you have to overcome in starting your own business. You just learn a lot of things along the way. And I think for me, my biggest challenge was accepting that I can make money out of something I'm passionate about. That was a huge challenge for me. And even till today, I struggle with it a bit because it didn't make sense to me personally, because I'm a very emotional person as well, is that I love what I'm doing. I'm just I'm really doing this because I want to help people. But then, you know, when you start doing that in this country, in the UAE, you need to be licensed. So, you know, obviously that comes with cost. And so it came to the point where my husband's like, you're not running a charity, you need to at least cover your costs. And I just found it really hard to kind of like to overcome that challenge. So it took me a long time with a lot of like help and support and talking to different people to kind of like, you know, justify, you know, doing that. But I think for me, my fear was that I would lose the authenticity of what I was creating, right? Because when it becomes a business, you know, if you're not careful, it can really become a business, and then you lose the authenticity of what you want to create for the community. So I was very, very careful, and I took things really slowly just to be able to ensure that that didn't happen.
I love your honesty though. I love your honesty. Thank you, Navine, because it's, it's something that, and you kind of said it straight up as well, like it is a subscription, but you've worked really hard to keep that authentic and your mission and your vision true to your heart. So I appreciate you sharing that.
Isn't that though often I love it, the fact that a lot of people start to do something really meaningful with something that means, that takes something that's their own passion and then turn that into their livelihood. And I do think then it's easier somehow to stay authentic anyway, because if that's something that was so close to your heart and that you were so passionate about, this is something I want to change and I want to show up, then I think that makes it easier not to lose your authenticity. And I think when you go through hardship as well in your life, whatever it might be, that has such a catalytic power to propel you forward and maybe take greater steps than you would have done if it had been something that didn't really mean anything to you. I mean, would you think that too, Jackie, that like through your own experience that has powered you on to say, I've been there?
Definitely. That's why I started the podcast, was because I'd felt incredibly lonely, and I didn't want anyone ever to feel kind of as lonely as I had. So I wanted to be that friendly voice. And also I really wanted to bring the human element to what I do. And I mean, I naturally brought in the poetry side of things because I couldn't not. But I also felt that was really self-indulgent, because was it just me that was like, happily sharing my poems? But actually, I'm really astounded at how often members have said that's been such a lovely thing, because like Navine was saying, like that, the human element, right, is just because you all are expats, it doesn't mean you haven't got all of these other different interests. And I think it's, the poetry side of things really helps people to explore the human element of it all. And it's not, I'm just this sort of label of somebody that's been affected by a loved one's addiction. I mean, even that title, they don't even get their own title. It's linked to somebody else, but yeah, and everything that I put in is everything that I wish that I had known. So it's literally my, over a decades of experience of not just professional, but obviously all the personal stuff. And I didn't want it to take people years to feel better. I want it to take them weeks. And that's, hopefully, I think that's what I've created. That's the feedback I get, which is brilliant.
It's the access as well. I think like that's something that's really motivating us, is just giving people access to content that if it's relevant to them, or they find it interesting, or they're in need of it, that they do it. And I feel that's a really nice.
Yeah, I think that's the thing, because it's really curated, so it might be, there's books in there and podcasts and meditations and all these different elements that I found really useful, and being able to curate that and saying to your own specific experience, these are the commonalities, and so these things might be helpful. Yeah.
I'd love to dig a little bit deeper in like your experiences and the day-to-day stuff. And have either of you like experienced any negative experiences, I guess, or like aspects to online, like your online or in person, and how did you handle that? And tell us more.
Yeah, I mean, like I would say online more than in person. And I think the energy that you bring to a space is the energy you get back. I really do believe that. For the most part, obviously, there's going to be occasions where that won't be the case. But I think when you have an online community, you have to be very clear about your group rules and guidelines, because that's what you fall back onto essentially if something does come up. And it's just a kind of like clear, easy way to deal with the situation. Because it's easy to be behind a keyboard and type what you like and and people like to egg people on for whatever reasons. And if you are very clear about your policies for your particular group, then it's quite easy to deal with it and dismiss that member if they continue to violate the rules.
Yeah, I think I'd agree definitely with having those boundaries and rules in place. I think for me as well, because it's a therapeutic space, it's the challenges of people wanting to use it as one-to-one therapy in a group setting, and it's being sort of clear about what the parameters are of what we can offer. And also people aren't used to being able to have their own voice, and so making sure that everyone feels like they're equally heard with all of the sensitivities and sensibilities that come with that is a constant challenge. But I always use that as work in progress. You know, it's part of the process of what we go through, and it helps to reveal to people things about themselves that they might have not sort of been aware of. So always look at it as, how is this helpful for you, and how is it helpful for the community?
And I guess it's just part of this world now, isn't it? You have to, like anything. Well, the whole world's always had rules, hasn't it? You need rules to control, you know, and acceptable behaviour. Then the other end of the spectrum, then I'm or the scale I'm interested in is, what have you ever experienced like lack of engagement? Because we at the Informed Perspective are still in our infancy, and we're disappointed. Well, let's just say disappointed. You know, sometimes that there's just not much engagement. This is why we love doing the podcast and meeting people one-to-one, and rather than kind of, you know, judging our value and worth on likes and comments and things like that. We get so much out of this, and we know that this is the direction we want to be going. But yeah, how have you found sort of online engagement, and have you ever experienced, you know, lack of engagement in what you do?
Happy to
Yes,
go first this time
absolutely.
if you want.
No, would you like me to go first?
I'm happy to go first if you want. You went first last time. I'll give you a bit of breathing space if
No,
you
you
like
go.
to think
You
about
go for
it.
it. You go for it.
I think it's about having realistic expectations, and I think it's such a minefield, because, you know, I know, like, we're doing the podcast, everyone was like, well, you know, well, why do you want to do it? Are you trying to monetize it? Are you trying? And it's like, I just want to do it. And then as time went on, I mean, downloads have never been that great, but what I ended up actually doing is I've sort of tapered off doing the podcast, because I was like, oh, you know, there's not that many people listening, blah, blah, blah. But I didn't give it time, you know, and actually it was a real asset. And what I got was people coming up to me and saying, I mean, I went to this random thing in London with other therapists, and this therapist sidled up to me and she was like, I listened to your podcast. I was like, you know, and I think it's those moments. I think it's about, you know, it's not about, again, there can be that real encouragement. It needs to be breadth and it needs to be massive, but sometimes it's about the depth of connection and the depth of what it's doing for one person, you know. And I think that's really important. I think the other thing as well is, I'm not up against them, but it feels like that sometimes. I've contacted different rehab centers and said, look, I've got this program, are you interested? And they're all interested up to a certain point, but they're all trying to make money themselves. And then it becomes about finances, and it's not necessarily about the mission, or it becomes, well, maybe we can do that in-house, or certainly when you talk about addiction, there's 12-step fellowships there. So that whole, and I'm not a marketing, although I have a background in marketing, it's really difficult to market myself and what I'm doing. And so I think that can be a real barrier of, sometimes I just need people to experience it to know what it's like. And I don't know how to get people to make that, you know, make that leap. But it's also, I think it's having the grace that sometimes things are early days and they just take time, and, you know, realistic expectations.
But I think if you're saying that, you know, as well, many people struggle with social media, for instance, like putting yourself out there, especially if you're trying to do something that's more about community and local community. And then at the same time, you've got to put yourself out there. And I think a lot of the time it feels like it's all about me, how people portray themselves. And if you're talking community, you know, it's a more big, wider, encompassing thing. And I think that is also a struggle to sort of combine the two and show up then with your authenticity at the same time. And we struggle as well. We struggle reaching out to schools, for instance. Here, we're trying to get motivational speakers in, because we're really, really passionate about the fact that the third space is so important for the young, and that the conversations, and also for adults as well, but that you have, you know, your conversations at home and you have your workplace or your school, but these conversations need more room, and they need more perspectives and room to grow. And we're struggling there. Again, we think that these motivational speakers are also, especially where we are, there's not really a big thing, bringing other perspectives in for the young to hear real life stories, really understand the important subjects that we're all talking about in the world around us, but in a way that they can engage with. And the schools love it. They love it. They want to hear it. They're excited about it. But actually committing and getting the speaker through the door is exhausting.
I've had that with schools as well. And I do think it is partly being strategic about where you show up. you know, so when you talk about social media spaces, people say you must be on Instagram, you must be on this, blah, blah, blah. And I've actually moved over to Insight Timer as far as my poetry is concerned, because actually I can have this nice little pocket there of doing it. And I think it is about, well, where sort of on a sideways glance are those communities going to be that I do think that sort of more strategic thinking around that can be helpful.
But you're also right, though, that like on a person by basis, they're the success stories, I think. And like when we see, you know, the tweens that we're engaging with and they're walking out, talking to their parents about stress, having engaged with us in the first place and continuing these conversations as an example, that is the moment that is like, yeah, that makes the difference. But I'm guessing, Navine, for you, it's more of a word of mouth thing. Is that the case? Like, because, you know,
So
in the
look, I mean, like,
you
like my community started from zero as well. And, you know, say from September 2019 till now, we've grown significantly. And I think it's just always remembering that we all start from zero, right? And it's just really about being consistent and really having the passion, believing in what you're doing. And I agree 100% with what you were saying. If you've made an impact to one person's life, you've made a difference. That's all you need to worry about, really. I'm like, if we think that we should be touching 10 people's lives at the same time, then we are really going to struggle and feel like that we haven't achieved anything. It can just take one person, like you, that child's life that you touched. He could go on and take that information and do something amazing with it. We'll never know about it, but we know that we've had some sort of impact. And that's really, really important, because to be honest with you, when I did my very, very first event, that was my biggest fear, is like, you know, what happens if nobody shows up? You know, what happens if people don't like what we're going to present? And, and so I actually had a friend, and she's the one that told me that, she would look, if 5 people show up and you've touched one person's life, you've done a good job. And I've been living by that since that day, honestly. You just need to be consistent with the online engagement. It's always a struggle. I mean, like, I've been doing this for years and I still, you know, struggle with online engagement, because people don't engage, they see it.
Yeah,
and you'll find out that they've seen it, but they don't engage. And that's completely fine. I mean, like, you just have to just know that people are, there's just so much information to consume now, right? The scrolling and the multiple apps that they're on, and the busy life, their mothers, if they're working, if whatever is going on in their life, it's impossible for them to engage in everything and respond to questions and comments, because we don't know to what capacity they are involved in different communities and outlets in their lives, right? So I'm one of those people. Like, I'm involved obviously with my community, which takes a lot of my time. I have my family. I'm a part of other Facebook groups, and I consume information, but I'm not really engaging because I don't have the time. I just want to kind of like go through and see what, you know, is of interest to me that I can benefit from. But if I feel something really speaks to me and I want to respond to that, then I will take the time and do that. So don't be disheartened. Honestly, I mean, like, if you love what you do, you have the right intention for it, you have the passion, be consistent, and it will happen. Just like it's just, and when I say be consistent, I mean, like, communities love consistency, but they also love change. So you need to see what you'll be consistent in and make that a consistent aspect of weekly. This is what we're going to do consistently. And what can you do that's different from everybody else that's within the same field as you? Right? Because the world is saturated with communities, and companies having communities, and businesses having communities. So, you know, as a community, you're trying to tap into a space that is oversaturated. But having said that, it is healthy for people to be part of more than one community, because each community serves a different purpose.
Yeah, but you say
Right.
that,
Yeah.
that there's all this choice and there's all these communities, but one almost has the feeling that it's still a void, and there's still a void there that
Yeah.
people haven't got what they need and what they're looking for, especially in our environment and the people that we've spoken to. I mean, I was speaking to a lady on a podcast at the beginning of January, and she lives in a tiny little village in Slovenia, and she's lived there her whole life, and it's been an amazing community. Even there, she says it's changing. The people are not getting involved in the same way. And so, yeah, there are lots of communities, but you kind of still feel like that there's still a
absolutely, there are voids, because, like, obviously, you know, there are lots of communities, but not everybody hears about those communities, which is why it's important to have so many different ones. But at the same time, we need to listen and observe what's happening to society, right, and evolve with that. Because if we stay stagnant in what we're doing, and the community or the society is moving on, we are going to lose it. We're not going to engage anyone, really.
Also, not just becoming necessarily a niche community. I almost feel like is actually just bringing everyone back at all. Like, what we're sort of saying is, do you know your neighbor? do you talk to your neighbor? Do you know why so and so is voting for so and so or not? Actually, it's not straight cut, they're right, you're wrong, or whatever. Then there's a reason why people have their opinions and why they decide to vote for who they vote for. And if you understand them as a person and you see them, right, as opposed to just a number or a name, it's very, very different. And then you can begin to understand those differences that we have and then somehow bring back that cohesion to a community then that isn't coming together, I think.
That's a very deep, big
yeah,
conversation
yeah.
that we can really delve into.
Yeah, no, it
Because
is
I
super
think,
deep. No, it is
yeah,
super
no, it is
deep.
super deep because I think what we need to really look at is the whole narrative, right? Why have certain movements been introduced into society? Why has the social media world become such an important part of our world and being fed to our children and to, you know, it's all a distraction. You know, there's a lot of disconnection, the loneliness, the mental health, everything that, you know, it's huge. It really is huge. And I mean, like, that can be a completely different conversation. But I
Yeah.
think there's a reason why we don't want to speak to our neighbors, because maybe we don't want to deal any, you know, or understand or, you know, be challenged with the different perspectives, for example, right?
And feeling like on a global scale, there's so much going on where you don't feel like you can make any difference to it, right?
I
And
think
there's
there's a key thing here about how much we've been groomed into not expecting or feeling okay with discomfort. And how do we get rid of discomfort? We distract ourselves in a whole bunch of, you know, ways. And even when you talk about, you know, the idea of the mental health field, and people always go, there's a bugbear environment, they say it's bad for our mental health. It's like, well, were you feeling sad or lonely or overwhelmed? Or we you know, we've lost all of that vocabulary around feelings. And I think, you know, even when you're talking about when people vote from different ways, it's we have lost the ability to handle our own discomfort, to name that, to share that that's what we're feeling, and to be able to regulate our way through that. And I think, you know, that's a key cornerstone of what we're dealing with now.
yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
as well, yeah, that a lot of it is because we're overwhelmed with so much information out there. And when it comes to communities and that, like, so if I think of some of, you know, people who I would love, you know, would be ideal market for what we're doing, you know, they probably aren't looking for other stuff. They probably don't realize that there's a void they've got because we're just surrounded by content, you know, everywhere, you know, where I always make it's not a joke, but the really bottom level, you know, about kids and screens, okay, whatever the take is. But even I find for my children, just the choice on Netflix is overwhelming. And for me, me and my husband, like, it's our most annoying thing we have to do is to choose something to watch. Okay, we should just not watch that. But do you know what I mean? Like, it's so overwhelming, and that's just one little content platform. And if you think of everything, and there's so much of value out there, but I think people are fatigued with how to find it, and then they're not understanding kind of what they need. And going to your point, Jackie, is like, actually, what are they needing what fulfillment are they needing, and why is something not serving them? How does social media make them feel? You know, I did something a few years ago where it's only positive things on my Instagram. I only followed people that would fill my cup. Yeah, fill my cup. Anything that, and you know, and similarly on Facebook, I would usually, when it's people's birthdays, if they didn't serve me in my life anymore, I would delete them. Rather than wishing them happy birthday, I'd like remove them as a friend. But it was just like, it was just my way, you know. But I don't know, I think there's just a lot there there's just so much out there, and we've not been trained how to manage it. And we're also, the younger generations are coming up as well. So I think, to sort of everyone's, but there's so much good out there. I think people just struggle to know where to look.
I think I honestly believe that humans were not created to consume so much information in such a short amount of time. And this is why we are facing a lot of issues. But yeah, I mean, like, you know, social media communities that you might be part of. I mean, like, I'm part of like loads of like Facebook communities here in the UAE. There are so many, and it's an emotional roller coaster. Like, one minute you're distressed by what you just read or a picture that you just saw, then you're laughing because they highlight a comedian, and then you're like worried because you see some news, and it's kind of like, we should not be dealing with all those emotions and like, you know, information on a daily basis, you know. So yeah, I think definitely I 100% support what you did, Jenny, because I think it's important to declutter what information you're consuming if it's causing you, you know, distress or impacting your life on a daily, because it's not healthy. It really isn't healthy to be exposed to what we're being exposed to, especially these days.
Mm.
Yeah, but
And then you
that's where community is really important, I think, as well.
And then you become numb, don't you? Because there comes a point when it's too much. And then when you read something that really should be heartbreaking, potentially you just, you know, it's too much. It's too much to take on. You know, we read what we read in the news, and it's every day just as you know, exhausting and tragic every day. So how do you deal with that? You have to kind of somehow see it superficially, which is
It's
difficult.
such a major shift, isn't it? You know, anything. I think back to when I was a child, and you had the news at 6 and 10, and
Yeah.
and that was it. You know, and I think that was another reason for coming off stuff, because one, I think it's about conscious consumption. But if I'm in a constant state of threat, then I'm in a constant state of fight or flight, and I'm not actually able to create and bring anything into community. Whereas if I pull away from that, I can then make conscious decisions about what causes I want to support and feel like I'm actually doing some good, rather than be this sort of passive active. It's like I feel like, you know, I'll share something because then that performative little share, and that'll do me for half an hour, that I care about this, everyone, you know, but it's not actually really impacting people's lives. And that's why I did come back to this idea of, you know, well, what impact can I make within my community and my sphere of influence? Let's sort of go back to, in medieval times, what would I know, and who would I be involved with, and taking it back to that to try and
That is
gain
so much
some
more
sense.
fulfilling for you, and you're getting your dopamine hit in the real world. And I think that's partly also that we've kind of forgotten that a bit in some environments, that, you know, you think online you're getting what you need, but actually if you go along to these events, like when we do these things, we do Connect Coffee or whatever else we're doing with the tweens, that moment of connection and then people making new friends and finding a new way of, it's so fulfilling for us, right? And for all of us, I think, in the work that we do. And I think that's gets forgotten, and you can't get that online. It's not.
And I think it's creating that space. And I was going to say as well, like and the importance of in-person interactions, but I do believe they can be online as well, because I feel like we're having a really meaningful interaction now, and we're not physically in person, but, you know, going with that's why I think you've got to take the time for those. And there might be a shift that people want in real life, but you can get so much value still. But if you create the space, it's not going to just happen, you know, or you go to the space, you find the space, I should say. It's not going to just magically happen. You've got to make some effort. And I think that's where sort of my curiosity and the question around engagement is, you know, people need to be proactive. Yes, we can carry on. We've got, you know, we know what all of us know what we're doing and where we want to go with it. But you know, it's inspiring others, I guess, to take that action and to get involved, to help themselves or to expand their opportunities or whatever. So it's really, you know, even, you know, whatever spaces you know, it's made me think we've all created spaces for other people. And I think, you know, community is a space for people to come together. So it's lovely.
Yeah, and then we're not going to lose the digital world anytime soon either. So it's that balance, isn't it? So
that Zoom subscription.
to roll with it. Yeah, but anyway, until we're all sitting here as AI people, you know, in the near future.
Oh God, don't say that.
Too much Black Mirror watching.
Yes, indeed. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I mean, it's really got me thinking.
It was lovely to speak to you.
My pleasure.
Really lovely to hear from you, Navine. Yeah, really lovely to meet you guys as well. Hear how you're doing.
And
likewise, Jackie, and I really love to read your poetry.
Oh,
yeah, same.
thank you. I can say